Hello friends, and welcome back to the Freedom Factory. We're here for episode 4, coming to you today in what has been another interesting week in the freedom struggle here in New Zealand. I am of course your host Adam Nuttall, and I'm joined by our producer Ace here in the studio. And we've got an interesting show here for you today, so glad you could join us. First we're going to have a look at an OIA response from the Minister of Transport, which is talking about vaccine passports. That's quite interesting. And then I'm going to do a little breakdown of He Puapua for you, a report on this document that's quite topical this week, so I just thought it would be good to get some clarity around exactly what that document is. Then we're going to have a look at an audio recording of a couple of ladies who tried to get vaccine data sheets from vaccination centres, and I thought that was quite interesting. We've got an update on the cancel culture coming up, which has been in full charge this week, big time. Then we're going to find time to play you a music video, since I know you like that sort of stuff. And then we're going to have a look at some clips from yesterday here in Christchurch, where we had our 1-year anniversary of standing up for freedom, standing in the square. So that was a great event we had here yesterday. And although the weather's been pretty bad, there was quite decent rain there yesterday. We had a good turnout, and people just stayed till the end. It was just really good to hang out with like-minded people, as it always is, you know. Then we're going to end the episode with a sit-down interview with Sue Gray, where we talk about the year basically, and the constitutional crisis generally here in New Zealand. So a real interesting interview there for you coming up. So glad you could join us. Stick around. Okay, so first up we're going to have a look at a post from Sue Gray from the 24th of May, where Sue has received a response to an OIA that she sent on the 10th of March, which has taken quite a long time for this response to come through. The response has come from Michael Wood, the Minister of Transport. So the response begins with a largely redacted email from the UK Minister of Transport, and it is titled UK Views on Vaccine Certification and Framework for COVID Safe International Travel. And I quote, "Other question include how to ensure any global frameworks (vaccine certificates) are implemented equitably, where to set the vaccine efficiency threshold, and what constitutes proof of vaccination, and whether or how passports could be used domestically (i.e. large crowds). So the response then goes on to outline an online meeting between Michael Wood, Minister of Transport, and Robert Courts, who is the UK Minister for Aviation. And in it, the Minister thanked Courts for his helpful overview of the current UK thinking and welcomed UK interest in collaboration. We were clearly, quote, on the cusp of a different phase of the pandemic response, so these discussions were timely. Notwithstanding current limitations on our scientific, i.e. around the impact of vaccines on transmission, close brackets, the fact that countries like the UK were making significant progress in thinking through how frameworks for COVID secure international travel could be made to work in practice meant that the conversation would continue to move forward at pace." So clearly the government is moving forward with plans, even though the science doesn't support their actions. You know, this is as good as an admission that they are working from an agenda. You know, they're not developing the best policy based on observations, really. So it goes on, and I quote, "Potential opportunities for the UK and New Zealand to cooperate on testing standards and vaccine certification to support the resumption of COVID secure international travel," and redacted. And that's really something, there's so much information redacted from this response that it's really quite troubling. But you know, clearly they are just pushing ahead with vaccine certification. They're talking to the UK about applying these same standards domestically to large crowds, attending concerts, that sort of stuff. So, you know, it's very interesting that their public rhetoric is so different to what they say in private, really, isn't it? So now we're going to have a look at the Puapua report, which has been a wee bit prominent in the news this week, and I just wanted a chance to go over the basics of it with you guys. So to begin with, I just want to have a look at the title of it. It is titled Report of the Working Group on a Plan to Realise the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, Puapua. So that's exactly what it is. This is a report on a UN plan to implement the declaration. Now, Elliot Ekelau has done a really good breakdown on this, and we're just going to play you a short clip out of that breakdown now. Here it is.
All right, so first and foremost, let's have a look. We've got a whole bunch of authors there. Claire Charters, Kayla Kingdon Beebe, Tamati Olsen, Waimiri Rangi Ormsby, Emily Owen, Judith Pryor, Jacinta Ruru, Naomi Solomon, and Gary Williams. Now, there's a couple of interesting parts in there. Firstly, almost all of them, and only because I don't know who Gary Williams is, I've been able to find information on everyone else except for Gary Williams. So all of those others are either fully or partially funded by the taxpayer. So they have been taking the money from the taxpayer for years and years and years, and I mean decades, types of years. They've all been or are linked to Te Arawhiti.
Yeah, so it's a really good little video by Elliot there, and if you guys want more information than what I'm giving you today, that's a really good place to start. So let's just have a look at some excerpts from this report, all right? So to begin with, we're going to go to page 4 where we find this. We are hopeful that our report will be published once it has been considered by the Crown, as we think it will contribute positively to the ongoing socialisation of the Declaration. So some interesting language there, isn't it? Ongoing socialisation. So moving on to page 6, we get some numbered points, and looking at point 1, we get this. The report provides a roadmap to achieve a, quote, Vision 2040, unquote. That is, realisation of the Declaration by 2040, the bicentenary of the signing of Te Tiriti o Waitangi. We have chosen this date as Te Tiriti o Waitangi is central to the DWG's report, and in the Aotearoa context it is inextricably intertwined with the Declaration. So these unelected people have chosen a date by which we need to be socialised to the plan. Moving on down to number 3, we get the meaning of self-determination and how it is exercised is up to Indigenous peoples to determine. However, it ranges from full independence at one end of the spectrum to participation in state government at the other. In between are self-government arrangements and autonomous authority in agreed areas, brackets, e.g. independent Indigenous education systems and healthcare services. So this is talking about setting up separate government authorities in an apartheid state, basically. Moving on to number 5. We consider Aotearoa has reached a maturity where it is ready to undertake the transformation necessary to restructure governance to realise rangatiratanga Maori. This maturity is reflected in some existing governmental initiatives, laws and policy, the voices of Maori and jurisprudence. In addition, there is extensive literature and empirical evidence that demonstrate the positive outcomes realised when Indigenous peoples make decisions for their own economic, social and cultural development. So they're talking about the transformation necessary to restructure governance. That's quite interesting, really, isn't it? So if we move on to page 7, and we have another numbered list, and we will head down to number 8 there. He Puapua only forms the first step towards the creation of a declaration plan. We'll certainly be listening out for the next steps, won't we? Number 9, New Zealand is the first state to embark on a process for a declaration plan that has the capacity to be a world leader in realising Indigenous people's rights, especially if it is ambitious. A world leader in being subjugated by the UN would be another way of looking at it. So further on page 8, the nation will know and appreciate iwi tribal boundaries where the practice of mana whakahere is evident. There will be an enlarged iwi hapu whanau estate supported by significantly increased return of Crown lands and waters, including tukutuku moana to Maori ownership. Brackets, in addition to Treaty of Waitangi settlements. So we're going to create a special class of people based on race, and we're going to give them Crown land. You know, where did this Crown land come from? It makes you wonder, you know. Are they going to give land confiscated under the SNAs, for example? You know. In a later section, it outlines a timeline, and under the year 2025 there is this statement. The government will have held a constitutional convention on the Crown's role as treaty partner in a future constitution. Now it's really interesting, they're talking about having a constitutional convention of some kind, and nowhere in the document could I find any reference to the democratic process or to all New Zealanders having any say in this. So it would be a constitutional convention without the consent of the governed. So, you know, there is some troubling aspects to this document, there is no doubt about it, and we definitely need to keep an eye on this. So, you know, we will keep an eye on this going forward. So now we're going to have a look at a little video that popped up a couple of days ago from Coronavirus Plushie, and it is titled Informed Consent ? COVID-19 vaccination ingredients not readily available at New Zealand vaccination centres. So we're just going to play you the important part of this video here. Check it out for yourselves.
So we're just going to go into the immunisation centre now. Hi. Thank you. I'm just wondering if I could get a insert. You know the insert that's inside the vaccine packaging. I want to make a decision about what's, I want to know what's in it before I actually inject myself.
Oh, okay. Have you got one today?
No, I just want to make a decision.
Okay, do you want to sit on the seats over there and I'll see what I can do for you? Okay. Right, so I've spoken to the vaccine lead, and because we get the production version, so we get hundreds, we don't get a little piece of paper with each one because it's different. So what she said is the best place to go is MedSafe.
You don't get inserts with these vaccines?
No, because they're not individual. We get bottles of it and we draw it up. So it's because it's the...
so how do you fully inform people? Because you're supposed to.
You can't fully
before they can have the vaccine. How do you inform them if you can't tell them what's in the vaccine?
Because what's in the vaccine is on MedSafe.
Okay. So do you tell people that when they come in? Because you have to inform them?
Or should they be told that before they come?
Because I certainly would like to be told what's in the vaccine before I make a decision, wouldn't
you? Yeah.
I'm
just trying to get onto MedSafe.
I mean, ideally you should have all that information in here. Otherwise, people can't give informed consent.
Right.
How do you feel about that?
Oh, I feel fine about it. But we're just following the Ministry of Health guidelines. So I'm just trying to get onto MedSafe. Here we go. So if you go onto MedSafe, Let's have a look on the
Oh, you're
data
in
sheets.
safe, yeah.
So I'll just have to see where it is on MedSafe because I haven't actually looked. Let's see if it's there. COVID. I think my thing is playing up. But if you do it at home on medsafe.co.nz, and you'll be able to find the information on there. So the data sheet's on there. Okay.
But you do need to have that here, don't you?
Supposed to, yeah.
You should do, otherwise
okay.
you've got people like giving you
Informing
things and that's
people
the
what
Okay,
is-
I will
illegal.
definitely pass that back to the supervisor.
That's essential that you tell people
People are
what's
just
in
being blind,
it.
they just don't know what they're doing because you haven't informed them. If you don't have a lot of information.
Okay, I'll pass that back to the
Thanks for
supervisor.
that.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you. Bye. Oh my gosh, so they haven't even got the ingredient list
They don't
on
know.
site.
They don't know.
So that's not giving informed consent, is it? Oh my gosh. There were lots of people behind the screen. There was lots of people. And there was about 20 people, all elderly, all of them elderly in the waiting room. Yeah.
So I wanted to highlight this video for a number of reasons, and certainly one of the largest ones was that it's an excellent example of the power of emotional discipline. You know, I think the two women in this audio did a simply fantastic job, and great example of the kind of approach we need, so full respect there. Now, I had a look on the medsafe.co.nz website, which is the one that was referred to in the audio, and I didn't even get a website, tell the truth. And that's where they were referred to when they asked for information. Now, we did eventually find it at medsafe.gov.nz, but it wasn't particularly easy to find. And the path that we went down from that website was we went from publications to media to releases for 2021 to 28th of May 21, community Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine, and from there we clicked on data sheet. So there's quite a few clicks to actually find it. You could also search it, but I mean, really it's about how difficult this information that should be freely available is to get your hands on. There's lots of obstacles there to cross when really the data should be in printed form at the vaccination centres. So quite troubling really is my take on that. And it really does seem that there is no informed consent, because if you were informed you wouldn't consent. So an atrocious wee example of informed consent there from the medical establishment. So now we're going to have a cancel culture update. So this week in cancel culture, they have been on the charge a bit too. So we've had many vocal patriots have had their social media accounts restricted or banned or shadow banned this week. You know, I've had quite a few difficulties myself. Now, Lee Williams has had his GoFundMe cancelled with over 7,000 in donations, because Lee actually has quite a lot of support in the community. Now, these donations will be refunded to the donors after GoFundMe has hung on to them for about a month, by the way. And this is all based on no evidence. There's no allegation of a crime. You know, people are literally just calling him names. There has been no trial of Lee Williams. You know, also this week, rather troublingly, we have seen a group called Speak Up for Women NZ, who had booked an event at the library, the Central Library here in Christchurch, and they booked the event a couple of weeks ago. And the event was to talk about sex self-identification. And they have had their event cancelled, and there was an article in Stuff about this, and it's titled "Christchurch Libraries Refuse to Host Controversial Group." This is by Nadine Porter and is from the 27th of May. And I'll just read you one part of this article. An email from library manager Chris Hay, seen by Stuff, said the subject of the group's meeting may be in conflict with the library's code of conduct. Quote, particularly our commitment to providing a safe and welcoming environment. You know, somehow I don't think that speaking up for women in NZ feel very welcome, do they, Chris? I mean, the lack of self-awareness in this is just staggering. Welcoming for who? So also, you know, we organised a private event, an invite-only event, and that's this evening. And somehow pro-government hacks, for lack of a better term, have found out about this, and they complained to the community centre and got our booking cancelled. All because they're just calling us names. So, you know, we have in the last couple of weeks seen the willingness of the police to prosecute a woman for comments in public that, quite frankly, are mild at worst, and they're out of context, and just compared to the hate that is directed towards anyone who criticises the government. This is just hypocrisy in the extreme. And this week really raises the questions for me that is participation in our society conditional on supporting the government? You know, we really need to call out the haters for what they are. You know, they're racist, bigoted bullies that can't win a debate, and that's why they come out and call us names. You know, people are getting messed around and cancelled just because they're getting called names. There's no measure of proof. There is no opportunity to respond or face your accuser. There's no due process in these things. People are simply cancelled because they're getting called names, and this is a really slippery slope that we're heading down here. So we're going to keep an eye on this one for sure.
So we're just going to go into the immunisation centre now. Thank you. I'm just wondering if I could get a insert. You know, the insert that's inside the vaccine packaging. I want to make a decision about what's, I want to know what's in it before I actually inject myself.
Oh, okay. Have you got one today?
No, I just want to make a decision.
Okay, do you want to sit on the seats over there, and I'll see what I can do for you. Right, so I've spoken to the vaccine lead, and because we get the production version, so we get hundreds, we don't get a little piece of paper with each one because it's different. So what she said is the best place to go is MedSafe.
You don't get inserts with these vaccines?
No, because they're not individual. We get bottles of it and we draw it up. So it's because it's the...
so how do you fully inform people? Because you're supposed...
So now we've just got a classic piece of counterculture music here for you from Conspiracy Music Guru. I know you're going to enjoy this one.
The sharing of biased and false news has become all too common on social media. More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
The sharing of biased and false news has become all too common on social media. More alarming, some media outlets publish these fake stories without checking facts first. Unfortunately,
Because of you, we're in this mess. Forever you will acquiesce. How you love to be deceived. agitating all you hear. Spread your terror, spread your fear. Yeah. Never your mind to be free. Never your eyes will ever see. Let the brood of tyranny begging for your slavery. They who have remote control, the TV know your very soul. Tune into the great deceiver. Television watching news believer. Inject your poison, wear your mask. All they have to do is ask. Never questioning authority. Blindly following like sheep. Yes or no, sir, free backs full. You television watching fool. Never your mind to be free. Never your eyes will ever see. Let the brood of tyranny begging for your slavery. They who have remote control, the TV know your very soul. Tune into the great deceiver. Television watching news believer.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy. Extremely dangerous to our democracy. This is 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 extremely dangerous to our democracy.
In their world forever locked. Into their world forever boxed. Reality you leave behind. A prisoner of your own mind. Forever you will be deceived. Never, ever to be free. Yeah. Never your mind to be free. Never your eyes will ever see. Let the brood of tyranny begging for your slavery. They who have remote control, the TV know your very soul. Tune into the great deceiver. Television watching news believer. Never your mind to be free. Never your eyes will ever see. Let the brood of tyranny begging for your slavery. They who have remote control, the TV know your very soul. Tune into the great deceiver. Television watching news believer.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy. This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
So as I mentioned earlier in this broadcast, we had an event here in Christchurch yesterday, a rally in the square to celebrate 1 year since we started coming down there and standing up for our freedom. And you know, the weather was pretty bad, to be fair. There's been quite a bad storm over the whole South Island this weekend. And you know, people still turned up. We had a really good turnout. There was probably about 80 people at the height of it there, and you know, people stayed to the end. So it just really warmed our hearts to see such dedication and to have good people come out and stand up for freedom like that. So you know, here's a clip of the events to share with you guys. First of all, welcome everyone to the square. You know, we're essentially here because a year ago we came down here to protest for our freedoms. You know, and any time I see a group of people together like this, just wanting to get together and stick up for everybody's rights, it just really warms my heart. You know, it gives life meaning. Hey. So you're real special, and thanks heaps for turning up. So now I'd like to invite up to speak Sue Gray.
As you probably know, she decided that we had a good argument on the law, but she wasn't going to help us on the facts. But it didn't matter anyway, because within 24 hours the government had changed the law. The most recent one is this vaccine challenge, and if it was a group of people saying, look, we're not happy about this, if we don't stand up and test the boundaries, we're not going to get in here. What's going to happen to us? There'll be another lockdown, and there'll be all sorts of things. You know, you'll lose your benefit if you don't have the vaccine. You won't be allowed to travel if you don't have the vaccine. We shouldn't wait until it hurts us personally. It's hurting all of us already.
You know, we are here today in the cold rain getting cold hands, but it's a warm heart.
Now, why would a Member of Parliament object to someone protesting against the government cover-up of child sexual abuse?
And I'll paint on that roof. I am a free man. I'm a free man in this country. And this country was once free. And I'm going to fight for it. We are all free citizens in this country. And our freedoms are being eradicated. And it's getting worse. This week you've seen an example of myself being cancelled. Politicians abusing their power, malfeasance, to attack me. They were part of that petition to get me sacked from my job last week, just over a week ago.
You know, they can cancel you, you can lose your job as an example. You know, you can lose opportunities, lose bookings at halls. We saw a group over here at the library had their booking cancelled, you know, but they can't actually change your ideas. You know, they can't reach into your mind and change how you see the world, and they can't change how you communicate with people, eh? So we have a lot of strengths in this.
But in fact, I'm going back to when you were just born of your mother. And at that moment, you were free. You weren't owned by anyone other than the caretaker of your life, which was your parents at that time. And we are free, and that's a common law where we have laws and rights where we are entitled to things that sustain our life. Unless you're in the water of the sea surrounding New Zealand, the jurisdiction of the COVID Public Health Response Act 2020 has no authority over you whatsoever.
The left have been trying very hard to shut down our things today. They rung the cops to try and shut us down today. They closed the venue that we were using tomorrow, but we've got another one, thankfully. You know, we've really got to do our part.
So as you saw in that report, we were joined by Sue Gray this weekend, who's come down from Nelson to take part in our 1 year anniversary protest. And me and Sue took the chance to have a sit down and proper interview. And I'm just really grateful to Sue for taking the time and spending the energy on talking to us. Really, and it was, you know, a fantastic interview, a really interesting wee interview. So I'm proud to present that to you now. Thanks very much. Hello friends, and welcome to the interview, and we're here today with Sue Gray. Thanks very much for joining us, Sue.
Yeah, thanks Adam, great to be here.
Yeah, so you're down here in Christchurch this weekend, for our 1 year anniversary protest,
Yes, so the Walk, Talk and Chalk came to Christchurch a year ago, and it's been, it was a big event then, and it's been great to see it's all still carrying on now.
Yeah, and we met a year ago, didn't we? And Kyle and stuff, we all met there in the square.
Yeah, it was the first, I think the first time a lot of you met each other, and certainly the first time I met any of you.
Yeah,
and since then we've met up again a few times in Wellington and Nelson, and now back down here.
Yeah, and it's been a really interesting year, really, hasn't it? It's been a year of great change.
Been a huge year. So last time when I came to Christchurch, we'd just finished the COVID lockdowns. We've been through this whole bizarre process of locking down, and we weren't allowed to do this and we weren't allowed to do that. In Nelson we'd started doing our own little Saturday morning protests, getting out at the supermarket and meeting at noon and trying to share ideas.
And I remember seeing one of your videos of that, in fact, and that was quite inspirational to see your video there during lockdown.
Oh, cool, yeah. Oh, we had a few incidents, but we had the one with the police when we'd started our Walk, Talk and Chalk down there, and our What's Your Line, because we were trying to get people to engage with us and say, well, what's the point at which you would actually step up and challenge the government, and instead of just going blindly along and doing what you're told.
Yeah, that's right.
And it was great. We actually got people drawing lines and writing their things on the floor, and then somebody complained about us at the protest, and the police came and ended up having a really good conversation with the police actually, and got a lot of people watching that video, and I guess that was a bit of a motivation to come and do a bit of a tour around the country.
Yeah, and so you came down to Christchurch and
Yeah.
on your walk and chalk and talk tour, and we all met there, of course, and we took I've taken the tactic of chalking to heart really over recent months, and it's a brilliant tactic, isn't it? So,
Yeah, look, it's really fun. The message is that we need to find our voices, you know.
Yeah, that's right.
There's been a lot of government telling us what we can and can't do, but actually we live here, and it should be seen as a good thing that we all have our different ideas and different perspectives. And if we're not allowed to express ourselves, it just creates a lot of sort of mental stress. So much better that we actually get out and share our ideas and learn from each other. Some people are happy to stand up with a microphone, but other people find that a bit nerve-wracking, but they're really happy to write some messages with chalk. So yeah, I personally, I love the chalk thing.
Yeah, me too. I think it's a great medium, great way to communicate, you know. And that finding our voice has really been a big part of this journey, hasn't it? You know.
Yeah, look, it has, and we've been talking a lot about COVID, but actually messages have come out, all sorts of different things. We've walked, talked and talked all around the South Island, all around the North Island, and you know, people came out with stories that they'd been sitting on for 20 years, and they finally felt somewhere that they were able to share their story. And it was just actually quite an amazing series of meetings that we had around the country. So, yeah, it's been really exciting. The general theme is sort of democracy and freedom of speech, and how important it is that we actually talk about democracy and what it means and what these freedoms are. Because if you don't exercise your freedom of speech, you lose it.
Yeah, that's right. You'll lose it really easily, and it's so fundamental, really, the freedom to speak your mind and talk to people about things,
What's the difference between being a human and not is that we do have different ideas and we have different ethical views on things and we have different perspectives on things. It's what makes the world an interesting place. But we live in this regime where we're all told that this is the rule and this is what you must do. Whereas that's, for my mind, not at all what humanity is about. It's the opposite, you know. So it's really important that we encourage all the different perspectives, and it makes the world interesting.
It does make the world interesting, eh? So a few months after that walk and chalk and talk, we had the election cycle, of course. Do you want to tell us a bit about your experience through the election cycle?
Yeah, look, I'd never been involved in an election before, but I'd become co-leader of the Outdoors Party along the way and candidate for Nelson. So it was a great opportunity to really understand how the election works. And the sad thing is, I learnt that there's not that much democracy in elections. So there's nothing like when you get involved, you really see the inside out of what it all means. I thought that it meant that everyone would have a platform and they'd be able to share great ideas and people would be inspired and pick up ideas from each other. But actually what tends to happen with elections is it's very controlled. A lot of places would only let the four main political parties speak, and then they'd say, gosh, isn't it boring? They keep all saying the same things. And yet there'd be all these other diverse views with people from the minor parties who wanted to get involved and wanted to get new perspectives on the table, but they were closed down.
Yeah, and you were a bit of a strong candidate in Nelson, to be fair. You did have some name recognition and you had a following, and they weren't letting you into these debates, were they?
Yeah, I was amazed. Like one of the local community newspapers organised a debate but said, no, there's only 4 candidates allowed, National Labour, ACT and Greens. But it's like, yeah, but hang on, this is not for the electorates. It's for the electorate seat. It shouldn't matter what party you're in. Surely you want to have all of the candidates having an equal footing. No, we're not prepared to do that. So, well, you know, is it possible to have a minute at the start just to introduce myself before your debate? No, we're not even going to do that. It was almost like there was a campaign to channel voters in one direction.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. A campaign seemed very premeditated, really, didn't it?
Yeah. So I found a really frustrating process, but there's nothing like being involved to actually learn what's wrong about a process.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly. Being involved, you learn the mistakes and the problems with it and the obstacles.
Yeah, and the very different resourcing. You know, if you're a big party, you've already got members of parliament who are well resourced with library support and secretarial support and free travel and everything else. If you're a party that's a new party, you have none of that. Everyone's donating their time for free, doing whatever they can do, and then the mainstream parties get, you know, $1 million plus for their campaigning. The small parties might get 40 or 50,000, which is not even enough for a TV ad or anything else.
Yeah, that's right.
So it's very, very hard to get traction.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Sort of an uphill battle, really, eh?
Yeah.
So moving on from the election cycle, we came into this. You've had quite an interesting court case, of course, the vaccine challenge. So do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Yeah. So a group asked me to have a look at how we could challenge the rollout of the vaccines and what aspects we could look at. So I put together the open letter for the government to the Prime Minister, the Attorney General and various other ministers, pointing out what appeared to me to be very blatant breaches of the law by the government, including this approval as a Section 23 provisional consent, and also the claims that this experimental vaccine was, quote, safe and effective when the fine print clearly showed it wasn't. Also about the vaccine being prescription only. Well, part of the document said it was prescription only, but then it turned out that they had this sort of vaccinators that had been employed to roll out this so-called prescription only medicine. There were so many irregularities in it. So I wrote to the Prime Minister, I hoped that we would get a response. Unfortunately, they didn't respond, so we ended up filing urgent High Court proceedings in Wellington to challenge them in court, which at least gave us a response.
Yeah, that's right. And so the provisional ruling found that they were in fact in breach and unlawful and sent it back to the government, and then the government just changed the law, didn't they? So it's quite an outcome, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it was a huge few days. The amount of work to get a court case ready for the High Court is hard to... You can't explain how much is involved, because you've got to get all your paperwork as good as you possibly can. You've got to know not only what you know you're going to be asked, but all the sort of peripheral information to put the very best possible case forward. And a massive amount of work getting it ready, especially on really short notice, because we wanted to get into court as soon as we could, because obviously there's no point waiting. You know, sometimes it takes a year to get in court, but by then the vaccines would have all been rolled out. It would have been a waste of time. So the court was great in giving us an urgent fixed date and getting at least one part of the argument, the legality of the vaccine approval, into court. And the judge agreed with us, asked really good questions, had a great crowd in court listening on to every word that was said in court, and no doubt at all in court that the judge was really concerned about how everyone in New Zealand over 16 could be classified as a limited number of patients. Because on any sensible reading of that, it meant a small number of people, a shortcut process where you just need a special approval for just a limited number of people who might be using an unusual medicine. But the government had basically, they couldn't approve it. Their own expert approval person from MedSafe admitted that they couldn't approve it under the usual criteria because they didn't have sufficient information to know it was safe and effective.
That's right.
Or the integrity of the process. So instead they'd done this provisional consent with 58 conditions. And again, the conditions didn't need to be answered until the end of July. So by then, most of New Zealand would have had this experimental vaccine before we knew the answers to these 58 important questions. And some of them were about the safety, about the integrity, or about the quality of the processing. So, the judge did keep to her word and came back very quickly within 6 days and gave us a decision recognising that real questions about the legality of the vaccine. She said, however, that she thought that based on what Dr. Ashley Bloomfield had said that it was the biggest public health problem in New Zealand for 100 years. Well, our experts strongly disputed that when you think about all of the other public health problems that we have.
It's pretty outrageous, isn't it?
Is this COVID really the biggest problem in 100 years? Is it a bigger problem than all of the other diseases that we have, the strokes, the heart attacks, the diabetes, that's killing a large number of people, the mental health issues, all of the sanitation problems, the contamination of our water. Is this really the biggest problem in 100 years? And is it such a big problem that it justifies avoiding the law?
Well, I guess the real point is that if they don't know if it's safe and effective, then there's no point justifying breaking the law. You don't know that you're doing any good anyway.
Well, and the law, the Medicines Act, it's not that silly really. The criteria is that the benefits must exceed the risks.
That's right.
And that you would have thought that if the medicine's risks exceed its benefits, why would you want it as a medicine anyway?
Yeah, exactly.
So it's a pretty sensible test. It went through, the government kept talking about the stringent processes. Well, they went through lots of processes, but they couldn't meet the criteria under any of those processes. So it was pretty tricky what they were saying. But they basically said it doesn't matter if we break the law because this is such a crisis that we can break the law. And the judge gave them the benefit of the doubt, but did say they needed to have a very careful look at the law. So what did they do? Within 24 hours, they'd changed the law.
Yeah, and when we say change the law, they've really destroyed the law. They've removed all protection there so that now the minister can simply approve anything he likes the idea of.
Yeah, the
really
law, as I said, the law used to be the benefit must exceed the risk, and if they were doing it through the shortcut provisional consent process, it had to be restricted treatment for a limited number of patients. They've taken out the bit about restricted treatment for a limited number of patients, and now it's just at the minister's discretion.
At the minister's discretion.
So, you know, if the minister's auntie owns the medicine company, they might just slip it through. If their child wants something, maybe they'll slip it through. There should be none of these conflicts and uncertainties in the law. It should all be based on rational, principled, transparent reasoning. But unfortunately, they've changed it in this ad hoc way that means that we lose confidence yet again in the integrity of what the government's doing.
Yeah, that's right, that losing the confidence. And there is a lot of confidence being lost in the system, really, isn't it? And over years, too, to be fair, in New Zealand.
Look, we have a system that protects itself, whereas what we should have is a system that protects the public interest. But the whole public interest and the whole democracy thing seems to have been watered down. And so now where there's a problem, the government thinks that protecting its own reputation is more important than representing the people who elected them.
Or more important than having an act that actually works. For example, you know, because somebody's going to have to fix it one day.
Well, and you know, they said, oh well, you know, it's an old act, it's been there since 1981. Well, it actually worked quite well for what over 40 years. 40 years, it had worked well. They'd amended it a couple of times to address various things, but to just say, oh well, actually it's a bit inconvenient now, so we'll just get rid of it. We'll just chop off the hard bit. Is not good lawmaking.
No, it's not.
Especially doing it in 24 hours or less without any consultation. You know, imagine if they had have come to us, when I wrote the letter on the 31st of March, if they had have come back and said, gosh, good point, we never thought about that. We're going to have an urgent look at a law change. What do you think about this and what do you think about that? And they could have gone to the doctors and the nurses and they could have gone to the drug companies and they could have gone to the public. And they could have consulted and they could have had a month of feedback.
Yeah, they could have.
But no, instead they've gone, no, we can't see a problem. No problem. Oh gosh, it's such a big problem, we're going to change the law overnight.
Yeah, just like that. Yeah, it's quite funny really, isn't it?
Oh, it's heartbreaking really, because I like to believe in the legal system. I mean, the law is amazing and generally the law is pretty good. It's not always implemented very well, but the actual concepts of the law are generally pretty good. But this is not the way to get public confidence in the law.
No, it's not. And it's really highlighting fundamental problems in this country to do with separation of powers and those kinds of issues, really, isn't it?
Well, in New Zealand, we're taught that we have this separation of power, this legal triangle with the legislature that makes the law, the executive that implements the law, and the judiciary that determines what the law is. But what we actually have is a massive overlap between the legislature and the executive, because every minister of the Crown is in charge of that part part of government, but they're also part of the legislature, so they're also part of voting on the law. We have the select committee process that could be a really good process of taking public input on different law changes, but that seems to be hugely dominated by the government, and once they've made up their mind on something, they don't seem to be terribly interested in what the public say. It pretty much goes through a process without any real intent to take note of what's said. And then we have the judiciary, where best practice all around the world, and what our own law commissioners said, is we should have independent appointments process, so that at the moment in New Zealand, the same people, and basically the Attorney General and his Crown Law Division, appoint the judiciary and promote the judiciary. So there's no independence, and the natural tendency, of course, is to appoint judges who they like and who have perhaps worked for them, their friends, their colleagues, and there's no incentive to appoint different people with different perspectives. So we end up with this very sort of blanded down judiciary, and it doesn't encourage confidence in the judiciary, and it's unfortunate because we could have an independent process that would be much better at encouraging confidence.
Yeah, we could do, couldn't we? We could have. There's quite a few things about the system that we could actually change, really, eh?
Oh, there's a look. We have no written constitution in New Zealand, and that is a real problem as well. So we have the New Zealand Bill of Rights Act, and we have still parts of the Magna Carta. We have the Treaty of Waitangi. So we have various conventions. So we have some constitutional sources.
So these constitutional protections, if we call them, they do rely on people challenging the government, though, don't they?
They do. Look, they need. Look, the interesting thing about the Bill of Rights Act, right? That is the one law for the people to hold the government to account. Most of the laws are the government telling us what we can and can't do, but that is our law where we can hold, in theory, our government to account. But the whole thing has been watered down so much that it's really difficult to hold the government to account. Plus, it's so expensive to go to court.
That's right.
Basically, you need to go to the High Court. Big filing fees, big risks if you lose, like court costs, and just finding a lawyer that's willing to take on the difficult cases.
Yeah, because they know they'll never get to be a judge.
Yeah. Well, this is where the interaction is. Yeah, look, a lot of lawyers like to have a very safe career. They don't like to challenge and run the difficult cases because they think it might look bad for them. And so a lot of the really important issues don't get tested. There's been a couple of good cases recently where we've tested search warrants or lack of search warrants by the police, which is really important. So there are opportunities to challenge the system, but it's not easy. And if people don't go to court, there's really no other way of challenging the judiciary. It's only when we actually ask the judges to get involved. The judges can't just appoint themselves to overlook situations.
And I mean, a good example of this was the recent ruling about police warnings and finding that police warnings were unlawful. And the police have actually changed their policy in the meantime, although it hasn't quite come through yet, isn't it? And they've been issuing these warnings for some 30 odd years, and they just never got challenged. No one had challenged them, and now somebody does challenge them, and what do you know? It's unlawful, and it's been unlawful for 3 decades.
When I worked for DOC about 12 years ago, we already knew that warnings were unlawful.
That's right.
We knew that.
Yeah.
And we had, especially when they gave a warning because they didn't think they could prove the case.
Yeah, that's exactly what happens. So there's no due process involved in that. You get no chance to respond to the allegations.
Yeah.
It's pretty much just the police are declaring you guilty.
And then they're noting it on their files that you had a warning, which is a negative that can be used against you in the future.
And in fact, that noting on the files and people accessing that through the police checks was a pivotal part of that case.
And the breach of the Privacy Act.
That was the major part of
information
that
about you. Yeah, but again, it's only when somebody goes to court. See, we shouldn't have to go to court. If we had a system with more integrity and more self-checks and balances, it would correct itself. But our system has got very lax, and it seems to be more interested in protecting itself and covering up its own decisions rather than actually looking for truth and justice.
Yeah, that's right. Definitely off the rails, aren't they?
Oh,
in real fundamental ways. So.
Yeah, and it's got worse. I mean, I've been interested in these issues for probably 25 years now, and it's definitely got worse. Like I've been despairing a long time of how do you hold the government to account, because it's not hard to prove that they've breached the law or they've done something wrong.
That's right.
But then what do you do with that information?
Yeah.
Where do you go? Who do you talk to? You know, if somebody's broken the law, you go to the police and you say, look, you know, the man at Doc's broken the law because he's thrown poison in my water supply.
Yeah.
The police won't act. The police say, oh, no, our job is to protect the Crown. Well, no, your job is to uphold the law, but they don't seem to have the training that makes them understand what their job is, and they look at you quite surprised if you say, no, your job is not to protect the Crown, your job is to uphold the law.
Well, it's not just the police that lack that training, it's throughout society, really, isn't it? A total lack of civics education
It is.
Throughout society, so that people don't understand the obligations. I mean, the police, for example, they swear an oath to keep the peace. Is actually the oath that they swear, isn't it?
But they don't think about it when they get into the job. Some
That's
do.
right.
Like I've had some interesting conversations with police recently who are really concerned about the whole COVID response, and they feel in a very compromised position because they're being told to do things that they don't believe are lawful, and it does make it really difficult for them. But the problem is not them. The problem is their bosses and the hierarchy that is saying, no, do what the government wants.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, political commissars acting. It seems that's certainly what it seems like, isn't it?
And then we've got Crown Law that are right in the middle of the whole thing, who could be holding the government to account, but they're not.
No, they're not. They're kind of acting like a defence attorney for a criminal client,
And
really, aren't they?
in-house defence attorney, there's no statute that sets out their obligations. So what they should have, in my view, is the Crown Law Act that should say Crown Law must at all times ensure that the government acts lawfully and in the public interest, and that established public law principles are applied to decision making. Like have some criteria about what they do.
Which would make sense because the public are the ones that are hiring Crown Law. So Crown Law are really the public's lawyers, not the government.
That's a really good way of thinking about it. That is how it should be. And they could be a very important check on the abuse of power by the government. But unfortunately, they see themselves as their role to enable the government to do what they want to do.
It does seem that way, doesn't it?
Which is a really different perspective, especially because, like you say, they are employed by us, the public servants, and this is where it goes wrong time and time again. The people that are in these positions of power have forgotten that they're there to represent us, and they are public servants, and their duty at all times is to the public. This whole body of learning seems to have just kind of fallen down a hole somewhere and been completely forgotten.
It does really, doesn't it? So where do you see it all going forward from here? What are our options for people?
It's not that easy because the system protects itself, and the best thing we can hope for is that enough people get informed as to the challenges and start doing their own research and start doing their own thinking and actually start holding the government to account in whatever way they can do it. And it might be asking for official information, it might be withholding payment if the government doesn't do its job properly.
That's right,
It might be more court challenges. It might be just refusing to get an experimental vaccine. Like imagine if all of our doctors and nurses and port workers and people working in retirement villages and whatever said, actually, no, I'm not a guinea pig. I'm not prepared to have an experimental vaccine. What are the government going to do? They're going to fire all of them?
Well, what we find is that when we actually question and confront the government, they tend to back down, don't they?
They do, and that's a classic sign of a bully, isn't it?
Exactly.
You know, if the public take a step back, the government take a step forward. But if the public actually draw a line and question them and say, no, I don't agree, this is why, this is what the law says, or this is what is fair in the situation, and they hold them to account. The government take a step back, and that is what we need to do, because in my view the government has well and truly exceeded their power,
Well and truly. Yep.
well and
Yep.
truly infringed onto our territory, our freedoms, our rights. And it's not
Yeah.
just with the COVID thing, but it's like this water services bill wanting to take over our water, all sorts of laws that they are, significant natural areas wanting to take over farmland.
It's a broad spectrum attack, really, isn't it?
It is.
Just broad spectrum.
It's just a lack of respect. It's
Yeah.
a lack of respect for the people that they represent, and they seem to be following agendas that are not what's good for us,
No.
but what's good for others. And
Yeah.
look, we can speculate what the agendas are and what leverage is held over the government, but the simple answer is that they are our elected representatives. They owe fiduciary duties to us, and they must act at all times in our best interests. It's
Yeah,
not
that's
their
right.
choice to act for somebody
Yeah.
else.
Yeah. So really, we are searching for ways to hold them to account on these duties that they have, and I mean there are ways of doing it. We've talked before about the State Services Act and the Cabinet Manual and other things like that they could be pulled up on, but that again, it's back into embroiled in that process, really, isn't it?
What we really need is a government with integrity. They actually need to be self-monitoring, and the systems are checks and balances. We've got the Ombudsman, we've got the Auditor General, we've got different groups Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment, but again the problem is they're all appointed by the same group of people, and they all, I'm not saying that none of them are doing their job, but I'm saying that they could do their job a lot more effectively if they had a very clear mandate that they are to act in the public interest and their processes are more transparent. Then we would get some accountability.
Yeah, and that's the problem, is the lack of accountability coming from the lack of constitutional protections in this country, really, aren't we? Because we don't have a hard constitution really at all.
No
do we?
written constitution, and we have various conventions. We have the New Zealand Bill of Rights Act, we have the Treaty of Waitangi, we have some basis for a constitution, but we don't have a real clear constitution, and so Parliament can pass, in theory, any law that it likes. They're not bound by the rights protected by the New Zealand Bill of Rights Act, whereas, say, in America, those rights are fundamental and Parliament can't infringe on them.
Yeah, that's right, it can't impinge those rights, exactly. And for example, 1986, the Constitution Act that they passed, there's no way a country like America you could even suggest passing an act like that simply invests all of the sovereignty in the Parliament. End of story. I mean, that's
And
insane.
the Supreme Court's Act passed by 51%. We were taught at law school that a constitutional change should have at least probably 75% vote, because if it's not that clear cut, it's probably not a good law.
I think
anyway.
around the world 2/3 is the lowest.
2/3 or
is the lowest
75%.
margin. Yeah.
But here,
Right.
there's no respect given to the sort of more fundamental constitutional laws. So everything is there at a whim.
Yeah, they're at a 51% control, and bang, you can change everything about the society. It's insane, really.
Well, it shows that at some point, in my view, the public social licence is lost. Like, the Parliament represent the people, well, in theory. If the people get to the point of saying, actually, you don't represent us, and if enough people get to that point, then we lose our respect for Parliament, and the system will fail. We've already got so many flaws in the system. It's not fit for purpose in so many different ways. The more we prod it and test it, the more obvious it is that it's failing us in so many ways.
Right.
And really, our government has a choice to up its game and respect what they're there for. Have a really urgent overview so that they remember that they're there to represent us. Because if they don't do that, they've failed in their only mandate, and they will make themselves extinct one way or another, because you cannot have a system that doesn't achieve its main purpose.
Yeah, and so they're really trying to exploit this weakness, a lack of hard protections, But the protections that we do have in a flexible constitutional arrangement like what we have really are around people objecting and standing up and protesting, aren't they? I mean, this is the key function of protesting is to demonstrate that objection, isn't it?
Well, we should have a whole range of ways for the public to be heard, and we should have active media challenging the government. If, you know, in the past, if the government had broken a law and been copped for breaking a law, or if the government was doing something questionable, the media would have been scrutinising that.
Yeah.
But what we've unfortunately got now is a dysfunctional media that's been effectively paid off by the government. What is it, 50 million before the election, 75 million since.
That's right, yeah.
If they meet certain secret mystical criteria.
Commercially sensitive criteria.
Again, so that big important control on our government has been lost. Now they're trying to close down freedom of speech and freedom of movement. You know, this idea that the government's the only sort of source of truth. Well, no, that is never true. There's always different ways of interpreting things, and it's always important to have different debates and different perspectives on the table. And especially when things are experimental and we're relying on models and assumptions. There's always so many different ways of interpreting these things. But we've lost that integrity in the way we do things. We've lost the questioning. We've somehow lost trust in our own gut instinct. We know when we are being bamboozled by government that are not acting for us. You don't need a science degree or an economics degree. You've got the gut instinct. You know, that's what we have got.
Yeah, and I think that's what's going on in this country myself, is that a huge amount of people do feel like that. You know, I really feel that there's a majority of the country, in my view, is very uncomfortable with what's going on. And it's just a matter of us learning to speak up and finding our voice to actually oppose them. Really,
that's the walk, talk and chalk. You know, let's find our voices, let's connect with others, and let's actually work out what we do want, because at the moment we're so busy defending ourselves against a whole lot of things that we don't want, because all of these changes are coming thick and fast. But let's actually have a vision of what we as the people do want, what's good for us as New Zealanders. How can we reconnect with our land, with nature, with each other? That's what we've lost, and that's why it's so important to have all these conversations and get us thinking about these things.
Yeah, that's right. And when you actually have these conversations with people, you discover there are all the solutions out there. There's some great ideas in this country, and we really do have all the solutions we need. It's just a matter of implementing it and bringing it to the fore, really, isn't it? And exercising those solutions.
I think New Zealanders are very wise, but the problem is the ones that are based in high-rise buildings in Wellington are the wrong ones to be looking for the solutions. You know, the solutions are out on the west coast and in the farms and in the small towns where people are actually living the life and actually doing it. We can't expect academics and people sort of sitting in offices to come up with real effective solutions for us.
Yeah, that's right. They don't understand, you know. And so, real people do have the answers, I guess, is the theme there, really, isn't it? So,
let's be proud of our voices. Let's be proud of our differences. Let's kind of talk to each other, because you can have these amazing conversations where different people throw their ideas on the table and you come up with something completely new that you had no idea where the conversation was going, and you come away thinking, that would actually be a great solution for this.
Yeah, that's right. There are some brilliant solutions just bubbling away under the surface, and they really are going to burst through. So I mean, that's really the theme, I suppose, of this interview in the end, isn't it? That speaking up and finding our voice is really going to find the solution.
Hope, optimism. We are the solution. That's right.
We are. Yeah.
Don't wait for somebody to come and rescue you.
Yeah.
We've actually got to step up and be the solution, not just necessarily alone, but by finding like-minded communities and sharing ideas, and actually having some courage to actually step up and speak out. That's how we the solution.
Yeah, that's right. And the idea that nobody's going to come to rescue us. Look, there are people out there that would love to help, but they can't help if we're not standing up. It's really that simple, isn't it? You know, we have to take the lead on this. This is our country. This is our children. You know, our future.
Our future.
So, we have to stand up and be the adults in the room, really, don't we?
We do. And we've just seen things eroding so quickly, and we've seen this fear culture. Whereas actually, let's forget the fear. Let's get a vision and some courage and some heart, some love for what we can have.
Yeah, that's right.
And let's just park the fear over there. Okay, look, we're all scared sometimes, but actually the fear is not the answer. The answer is the vision of what we do want and what we can each do. If everybody does a small step, we can do miracles.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah, and it is interesting that people like yourself have been pushing back against this for years, and myself and Kyle, and lots of others. We're not afraid. The ones that have been in this game for quite a while. We're not afraid of standing up.
Well, I'm much more afraid of sitting there and watching.
Definitely,
the bad things happen around us.
Yeah, exactly.
It's actually quite empowering stepping up, and you realise that when you step up, others will step up with you.
Yeah, exactly.
And you just get carried along on a wave of energy and enthusiasm.
That's right.
And at least we're giving it our best shot.
Yeah, yeah.
Because if we do nothing, we will lose everything.
Yeah.
Because all of our rights, as with bullies, all bullies, they just keep pushing while they can get away with it. If we step up to them, they lose their nerve and they run a mile.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's pretty much it, isn't it? We're going to step up and save the country. So, yeah.
We're going to be busy.
Yeah, we are. But, we believe in you guys. We really do. And we believe in, the good people of New Zealand are really a force to be reckoned with. A sleeping giant.
Well, that is the great thing. You travel around the country and you just meet the most amazing people who have been doing all kinds of incredible things, often very quietly in their own little community. But there are so many of these people.
So many of them.
We just have to give them the courage and the voice and the platform and connect them with others, and suddenly we've just got this whole tsunami of people power, and it'll be unstoppable.
Yeah, that's right. It will be unstoppable. So. Well, thanks very much for joining us for the interview today, and I'm just so glad you came down this weekend. It's just fantastic to round off a year. Really, a year of extreme growth. So
thank you. What the next year will bring.
Yeah, we'll see, but it's excellent. So thanks very much, Sue.
No, thanks, Adam.
You take care of yourself.
Much appreciated. Thank you.
Well, we certainly covered a lot of territory in that interview, and it was great to catch up with Sue and to cover everything that's been going on. It's been a really interesting year and a year of great growth for a lot of us, There's lots of stuff lined up for future shows, so I'm already working on next week. We are already working on next week. It's going to be a great show, and I know you guys are looking forward to it, and I hope you enjoyed the show. We'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us.